Imagine a world where the mightiest empire on earth, flush with unimaginable wealth, crumbles not from barbarian hordes at the gates but from the quiet rot within its own vaults. A pattern so precise, so inescapable that it has felled giants time and again. And now, in 2025, as America's global dominance hangs in the balance, the signs are flashing red. We're not just tracing the footsteps of fallen powers, we're sprinting toward the same abyss. Picture this: the United States, with its trillion-dollar military sprawled across the planet. It's a dollar reigning as the world's lifeblood currency. But beneath the headlines of innovation and influence, cracks are forming. Debts ballooning beyond comprehension, alliances fraying, resources stretched to the breaking point. This isn't speculation, it's history repeating itself with chilling accuracy. Three superpowers in the last half-millennium, Spain, Britain, the Soviet Union, each followed an identical path to ruin. And the data doesn't lie. America has already ticked off 5 out of 7 deadly stages. If we don't wake up, the curtain could fall faster than anyone dares predict. To grasp the gravity, we have to peel back the layers of what really kills an empire. It's not the dramatic clash of swords or missiles. It's the insidious creep of economic decay. Empires die when their ambitions outpace their means, when the machinery of power starts to grind down from overuse and neglect. At first, the symptoms are subtle. A dip in productivity here, a spike in borrowing there. The world still bows, the currency still flows, but soon the facade shatters. Allies drift away, rivals circle closer, and the once mighty core hollows out. This isn't ancient lore, it's a blueprint etched in gold, pounds, and rubles. And it's unfolding right now, in real time. Let's journey back to the dawn of this fatal sequence. Spain in the late 1500s, the original colossus of conquest. Europe trembled under the shadow of their galleons, laden with treasures from a new world that seemed like a divine gift. In 1492, Christopher Columbus's voyages unlocked a floodgate of riches. Vast silver veins in the Andes, gold from Aztec hoards. By the mid-16th century, Spanish ships were hauling hundreds of tons of the stuff annually, flooding markets from Manila to Mexico City. The real Spain's silver coin became the undisputed king of global trade. Merchants from Amsterdam to Istanbul hoarded it like sacred relics. For a moment, it felt eternal. A nation that literally minted the world's wealth, invincible against all comers. But invincibility breeds hubris, and hubris demands endless wars. Enter King Philip II, whose reign from 1556 to 1598 turned Spain's fortune into a war chest. The empire's reach exploded, conflicts raging across the Mediterranean against the Ottoman Turks, skirmishes in Italy and France, a brutal suppression of Dutch independence fighters, naval showdowns with England's privateers, even clashes in the distant Philippines and colonial outposts. By the 1580s, Spanish forces were entangled on 4 continents, a web of commitments that drained the treasury like a sieve. Half the crown's income vanished into armaments and armies, yet the appetites only grew. Resources poured out, but little flowed back in innovation or infrastructure. Spain's heartland stagnated as the gold rush masked a deeper malaise. Desperation set in, and with it, the second strike: currency sabotage. Taxes couldn't keep pace with the frenzy, so Philip's treasurers turned to the age-old trick of the desperate ruler, diluting the money supply. Pure silver reals began appearing with copper alloys, first a pinch, then half, then more. The coins clinked the same, bore the same royal seal, but their intrinsic worth evaporated. By the early 1600s, they were little better than base metal disguised as bullion. Trust eroded overnight. Traders in foreign ports demanded premiums or outright refused them, sparking runaway inflation that scorched Spain's domestic economy. Prices for bread and cloth doubled, tripled, as the empire's own wealth weapon turned against it. The noose tightened with the debt avalanche. To fund the endless campaigns, Spain turned to Europe's moneylenders, Genoese families, Flemish syndicates, anyone with deep pockets. Loans piled on loans, interest compounding like a storm. Just 2 decades into Philip's rule, in 1557, the kingdom defaulted spectacularly, freezing assets and begging for restructurings. It wasn't a one-off. Bankruptcy struck again in 1560, 1575, and 1596, 4 cataclysms in 4 decades. Each time the cycle repeated. Borrow more, promise reforms, default anew. The real's prestige plummeted. Trade routes bypassed Spanish ports, and the empire's aura of supremacy faded. By 1670, Spain was a shell, a bankrupt has-been, its colonies slipping away, its military a relic. The pattern was born. Fast forward 2 centuries, and the torch passed to Britain, the empire where the sun truly never set. By 1914, they commanded a quarter of the planet's land and people, from the sun-baked sands of India to the foggy factories of Manchester. The pound sterling wasn't just money, it was the artery of global commerce, backed by the Royal Navy's iron fist. London banks financed wars, railways, and revolutions worldwide. The British believed their system was bulletproof, industrial might fused with colonial extraction, a perpetual engine of prosperity. Yet the Great War of 1914 to 1918 ignited the fuses. To crush Germany and its allies, Britain mobilized an unprecedented machine. Millions under arms, convoys snaking across oceans, debts to American creditors skyrocketing. The cost? Over 25% of national wealth in 4 years, with the pound temporarily unmoored from gold to print whatever was needed. Post-armistice, the empire doubled down, quelling uprisings in Ireland, Egypt, and Mesopotamia while clinging to far-flung dominions. Military outposts dotted every continent from Singapore to Suez, demanding endless tribute in blood and treasure. The strain showed in hollowed industries at home, shipyards idle, textiles lagging behind upstart America and Germany. Currency betrayal followed, subtler, but no less lethal. To manage the war hangover, Britain suspended gold convertibility in 1914, flooding the system with paper pounds. When they limped back to the gold standard in 1925 at an overvalued rate, it crippled exports and fueled deflation. Workers rioted, strikes paralyzed coal mines, and the 1929 crash amplified the chaos. The pound's reserve throne wobbled as dollars gained ground. Nations like Canada and Australia hoarded greenbacks instead. Inflation morphed into stagnation, eroding savings and investment. Then the debt deluge, Britain's war bonds owed to New York financiers, ballooned to billions. By the 1930s, repayments siphoned off gold reserves, forcing devaluations and controls. World War II sealed the fate. Another orgy of spending, with Lend-Lease from America turning the UK into a debtor supplicant. Post-1945, the empire unraveled. India independent in 1947. Colonies cascading away. Sterling crises hit in 1947, 1949, 1967, each stripping another layer of power. By the 1970s, Britain was the sick man of Europe, its currency a shadow, forever in Washington's orbit. The pattern echoed Spain's. Overreach, debasement, default's shadow. Now the Cold War's chill finale. The Soviet Union, born in 1922 from revolution's fire, peaking in 1991 as a nuclear behemoth. Spanning 11 time zones, it projected power from Havana to Hanoi, satellites orbiting, armies in Eastern Europe, influence in Africa and Asia. The ruble, though not fully convertible, underpinned Comecon trade blocs, a closed-circuit reserve for the communist world. Moscow's leaders saw it as the antidote to capitalist decay: planned economy, endless resources from Siberian oil fields, a workforce ideologically forged. But the Afghan quagmire in 1979 exposed the fractures. To prop up a puppet regime, the USSR poured in troops and tanks, mirroring imperial overstretch on a frozen scale. Simultaneously, arms races with the West escalated. Intercontinental missiles, space programs, subsidies to client states from Angola to Nicaragua. Military spending consumed up to 25% of GDP, diverting steel and scientists from consumer goods. Bread lines lengthened, factories rusted, productivity flatlined as corruption and inefficiency gnawed at the core. Debasement came through the back door. Chronic shortages forced black markets and inflated official prices, while the ruble's external value was artificially propped by oil exports. When prices crashed in the 1980s, the facade cracked. Gorbachev's perestroika tried reforms, but it unleashed inflation without unleashing growth. Ruble notes multiplied, yet shelves stayed bare. The spiral peaked in debt and denial. Western loans for grain imports piled up, but hard currency dried up. By 1989, allies like East Germany bolted for the West. Satellites like Poland and Hungary sought IMF lifelines. The August 1991 coup attempt was the death knell, not tanks and streets, but empty coffers. The USSR dissolved in 900 days, its economy imploding into hyperinflation and barter. Rubles became wallpaper, power vacuums invited chaos. 3 empires, 3 identical downfalls: overextension, monetary sabotage, debt's inexorable pull. What ties these tales is a 7-stage death march, each step a decision point where leaders chose illusion over adaptation. Stage 1, the illusion of permanence, where wealth breeds complacency. Stage 2, military sprawl, commitments eclipsing capacity. Stage 3, resource misallocation, starving the productive heart. Stage 4, talent exodus, the best fleeing for greener fields. Stage 5, currency erosion, allies quietly diversifying away. Stage 6, ally abandonment, hedges turning to breaks. So Stage 7, the cascade, default, isolation, collapse. Spain hit all 7 by 1648. Britain by 1956's Suez humiliation, the Soviets by 1991, and America? We're midway through, perilously. Stage 1. Check. Post. Tuate. Pyaktué, supremacy, bred a quote. One mindset. Endless interventions from Korea to Kabul. Stage 2. Over 800 bases in 80 countries, forever wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, proxy fights in Ukraine and the Middle East. Annual defense budgets topping $900 billion, more than the next 10 nations combined. Stage 3. Misallocated trillions into finance over manufacturing. Rust belts hollowed while Wall Street booms. Stage 4. Brain drain accelerating. Top engineers to Asia. Inequality pushing talent abroad. Stage 5. Dollar debasement via quantitative easing post-2008. Now $35 trillion in debt. BRICS nations trading in yuan and rupees, Saudi deals in non-dollars. We're barreling towards 6 and 7. China's Belt and Road courts our allies. Europe eyes strategic autonomy. Interest payments alone devour defense budgets by 2025 projections. Inflation lingers. Supply chains snap. It's not if, but when the flood of dollars repatriates, sparking turmoil. Why does this matter now? in 2025 because the pace is blistering. AI and renewables shift power eastward. Climate crises strain resources. Geopolitical flashpoints like Taiwan multiply risks. We've ignored the math. Debt to GDP at 130%. Entitlement promises outstripping revenues. A military unfit for peer conflicts per Pentagon reports. Denial persists. Quote two, we say, just as Spain, Britain, and Moscow did. But history whispers, no empire is. As the sun sets on our unipolar moment, the question isn't survival, it's adaptation. Will we prune the overreach, rebuild the core, restore trust in our currency, or follow the script to the end? The pattern isn't fate, it's a warning. Heed it, or become the next chapter in the annals of fallen giants. The clock is ticking, louder than ever. Imagine a world where rivers of gold flow endlessly into your coffers, turning you into the mightiest empire on earth. Yet that same glittering fortune becomes the noose that strangles your soul. Spain, the colossus of the 16th century, learned this brutal truth the hard way. As their treasury overflowed from the New World's mines, they spiraled into a trap of their own making, a financial house of cards built on borrowed time and fleeting riches. What if I told you this wasn't ancient history, but a blueprint for how superpowers crumble? Today, we're peeling back the layers of imperial downfall from Madrid's shadowed alleys to London's fog-shrouded streets, revealing the invisible forces that devoured two giants and whispering a warning for the empires rising in our own time. Let's step into the heart of 16th century Spain, where King Philip II's grand vision was already fracturing under the weight of endless ambition. Fresh off a string of defaults in 1557, 1560, 1575, and 1596, the crown vowed sweeping changes, tighter fiscal reins, smarter spending, a path to stability. But promises evaporated like morning mist in Castile's sun. Instead, the court doubled down on extravagance, borrowing from Genoese bankers and German houses at crippling rates, fueling wars in the Low Countries and dreams of universal monarchy. It wasn't just recklessness, it was addiction to the easy influx of American silver and gold, the Potosi mines pumping out fortunes that masked the rot beneath. This was the empire at its zenith, vast, invincible, or so they thought, yet the seeds of ruin were sown in the very opulence that defined them. To understand the hidden machinery grinding Spain into dust, we must confront the paradox of prosperity, abundance that breeds complacency. Flooded with treasure from conquered lands, Spain's elite turned away from the sweat of creation. Why till barren soils when foreign granaries stood ready? Why forge steel in Toledo's forges when Milanese blades could be purchased with a wave of the hand? The nobility, steeped in chivalric pride, scorned manual labor as fit only for peasants or heretics. Manufacturing withered. Once thriving shipyards in Bilbao gathered cobwebs. Agriculture, the backbone of any realm, faltered as landlords hoarded bullion instead of investing in plows and irrigation. This wasn't mere laziness, it was a systemic curse. The __quote_3__ economists later dubbed the Dutch disease, where easy money inflates imports and starves homegrown industry. By the late 1500s, Spain had morphed into a grand bazaar for Europe's bounty. Caravels laden with Aztec silver docked in Seville, only to reload with Burgundian tapestries, Venetian glass, and Flemish cloth. The wealth surged through the peninsula like a river carving canyons, vibrant, unstoppable, but leaving the land parched. Historians point to the 1600s as the tipping point. Domestic output plummeted. Wheat fields lay fallow, wool mills silent. Spain, once a breadbasket, imported half its food. When the Indies' veins began to thin, the mercury-polluted mines of Huancavelica yielding less ore each year, the illusion shattered. No more subsidies for the endless Habsburg wars, no more payments to mercenaries in Flanders. The empire, propped up by phantom riches, teetered on the edge of abyss. As the financial tremors escalated, the implications rippled into every corner of society, igniting a cascade of decay that no royal decree could contain. Picture Madrid in the 1620s, once a hub of Renaissance splendor, now choked with vagrants and footpads. Crime surged as idle hands turned to theft, banditry plaguing the roads from Toledo to the coast. The middle class, merchants, artisans, the very engines of growth, fled across borders, their talents blooming in Amsterdam's canals and Paris's salons. Spain hemorrhaged its innovators to rivals who prized their skills, Dutch engineers draining polders, English clothiers revolutionizing trade. What remained? A bureaucracy swollen with sinecure seekers, an army of conscripts enforcing a fading glory, and a clergy more focused on inquisitorial fires than economic revival. No fresh ideas, no new ventures, just a voracious court draining the dregs. The losses mounted like storm clouds over the Sierra Nevada. In 1640, Portugal, integral to Iberian trade routes, broke free in a nationalist uprising, siphoning naval power and spice monopolies. A decade later, the United Provinces of the Netherlands, that __quote_4__, yielding shipbuilding genius and Baltic commerce, slipped from Madrid's grasp after the 80 Years' War. By 1700, the once unrivaled empire was a hollow husk, territories on maps but fiscal paralysis at home. Spain tumbled from global hegemon to European also ran in a blink of history's eye, her recovery a distant dream. Today, the echoes linger in flamenco rhythms and sun-baked plazas, charming relics of conquistador fire, now drawing camera-toting visitors rather than commanding fear or fortune. Fast forward 3 centuries and the pattern repeats with eerie precision across the Atlantic. Enter Britain at the dawn of the 20th century, the empire on which the sun never set, a colossus spanning a quarter of the globe, from Canadian tundras to Australian outback, Indian heartlands to African savannas. 400 million souls under the Union Jack, with the pound sterling as the world's lifeblood. Every commodity contract in London, every central bank's vault stuffed with gilts. The city was the pulsing heart of finance, a labyrinth of brokers and bullion dealers where fortunes were minted. Yet beneath the pomp of coronations and naval parades, the same imperial flaws festered. Britain, like Spain before her, mistook permanence for destiny. The unraveling began with the specter of overreach, a military web stretched to breaking. By 1900, redcoats garrisoned outposts on every continent, quelling uprisings in Sudan, patrolling opium routes in China, fortifying Singapore against shadows in the east. The ledger bled red, garrisons, gunboats, governors costing millions annually. Then came the guns of August 1914. World War I wasn't just Europe's nightmare. It was Britain's crossroads. Neutrality might have let rivals exhaust themselves, preserving the imperial purse, but pride and alliances demanded entry. The Isles mobilized, pouring £10 billion, over £1 trillion in modern terms, into trenches, tanks, and terror. Debts ballooned to New York bankers, the old world's creditor flipping to debtor overnight. Victory in 1918 came at a Pyrrhic price, the empire intact on paper, but its finances in tatters, gold reserves halved from pre-war peaks. Delving deeper into the concealed gears, currency became the silent saboteur. The pound, gilded by the gold standard since Waterloo promised unassailable value. But the Great War's furnace had melted reserves away, shipped to America for munitions and munitions makers. Returning to gold in 1925 at the 1914 parity seemed a defiant restoration. It was folly. The overvalued currency priced British goods out of markets. Exports cratered from textiles to coal. Factories idled in Manchester. Bread lines snaked through Liverpool. To prop the pound, the Bank of England hiked rates, choking credit and innovation. The domestic engine seized. By 1931, with the Depression's gales howling, suspension came. The pound plunged 25%, a seismic admission that the Reserve King had feet of clay. Global traders scattered, seeking refuge in dollars and francs. The debt vortex widened with horrifying speed in the 1940s. World War II demanded another £30 billion, 3 times Britain's GDP, funneled through Lend-Lease from Roosevelt's arsenal. By VE Day, obligations to Washington and Ottawa eclipsed national output. The empire, victorious yet vanquished, could no longer shoulder its burden. India, the jewel in the crown yielding cotton, tea, and taxes for 2 centuries, was granted independence in 1947 amid riots and retreats. The dominoes toppled. Ghana in 57, Malaysia in 63, the Caribbean isles scattering like leaves. By 1970, the pink on the map had faded to footnotes, the Commonwealth a polite shadow of dominion. Social fractures mirrored Spain's, as the sterling slide eroded the home front. The pound's value eroded relentlessly, from $4.03 in 1940 to $2.80 by 1950, $2.40 in 1970, scraping $1.30 today, a regional relic, not a global throne. Britain clung to facades, veto power in the UN, Trident submarines, the quote, _5, with America. But the truth pierced the veil. Factories shuttered in the Midlands. Talent emigrated to booming U.S. tech hubs. Crime ticked up in post-war slums, while bureaucrats and pensioners consumed what visionaries built elsewhere. From sun-never-setting sovereign to nostalgic mid-tier power, Britain's arc traced Spain's fatal curve. Why does this echo chamber of empires matter now in our hyper-connected 21st century? As tensions simmer from the South China Sea to the Sahel, superpowers stretch thin, borrowing against futures yet unwritten. The U.S., with its dollar hegemony and bases encircling the globe, mirrors the overextension playbook. Trillions in deficits. Endless engagements. Could the resource curse strike Silicon Valley or debasement erode the greenback's throne? History isn't prophecy, but it's a stern oracle. Ignore the patterns, and the fall from grace accelerates. In the end, Spain and Britain teach a timeless requiem for hubris. Empires rise on innovation and grit, but crumble under the weight of illusion. Easy money, unchecked ambition, the lure of endless import. Their descendants wander charming ruins while the world spins onward. The question hangs in the air like unsaid thunder. Who will heed the warning before the gold turns to dust? Fade in, dramatic orchestral swell, black and white footage of crumbling empires, Roman aqueducts in ruins, Spanish galleons sinking, British factories shuttered. Cut to a map of the world pulsing with red lines of military reach, narrowing to a single flickering light over the United States. Narrator, deep measured voice like a detective unveiling a conspiracy. Imagine this. A colossus strides the earth, its shadow eclipsing nations, its arsenal unmatched, its currency the lifeblood of global trade. But deep inside, rot sets in, not from enemies at the gates, but from the poison of its own excess. Empires don't fall in thunderous battles. They crumble in silence, hollowed out by the very systems that once made them invincible. And right now, as you watch this, the world's last superpower is tracing those same fatal footsteps. What if I told you the blueprint for America's decline is already written in the dust of forgotten regimes? Buckle up. The warning signs are flashing red, and ignoring them could cost us everything. Transition. Slow zoom on archival footage of post-WW2 Europe, Soviet flags waving triumphantly over Berlin, intercut with grainy images of missile parades and space launches, tense underscore builds. Let's rewind to the ashes of World War II, 1945. From the frozen steppes to the iron curtains of Europe, the Soviet Union rose like a titan unchained. They had it all. A nuclear arsenal that could end civilizations, an iron grip on half a continent, satellites piercing the stars. Leaders in Moscow whispered of destiny, communism as the inevitable tide, washing away the greed of capitalism. For nearly 5 decades, they dueled the West, tank for tank, missile for missile, forging an empire that seemed eternal. But empires, as history whispers, are illusions built on fragile foundations. Beneath the parades and propaganda, a slow-motion catastrophe was unfolding, one that would expose the deadly flaws in any overreaching power. Cut to animated graphics, a Soviet economic engine sputtering, gears grinding to a halt. Maps show red arrows of military spending ballooning while factories idle. First, the invisible killer, relentless military overreach. Picture it, the Kremlin pouring 15 to 20% of its entire economy into weapons and warriors, triple what their American rivals committed. Why? Paranoia fueled the fire. They chased U.S. innovations across oceans and skies, mirroring every alliance from the Atlantic to Asia. Afghanistan became their quagmire, a bleeding wound of endless conflict, and it didn't stop there. Cuba's sugar fields, Syria's deserts, Vietnam's jungles, North Korea's mountains, Angola, and Ethiopia's battlegrounds. Wherever the stars and stripes fluttered, the hammer and sickle had to strike back. The tab? Astronomical. An economy dwarfed by the West's simply couldn't sustain the strain. Resources funneled to fronts abroad starved the heartland at home. Suspense mounted as cracks appeared, supply lines stretched to breaking, morale fracturing under the weight. How long could they play this global game of catch-up? Shift, somber tones, footage of empty Soviet shelves, rusted machinery, farmers toiling in outdated fields. Build intrigue with a ticking clock sound effect. As the 1970s dawned, the second shadow loomed, stagnation gripping the machine. Oil gushed from Siberian wells, a temporary lifeline propping up the facade of strength. But peel back the layers and the truth was grim. Factories churned out shoddy goods, unfit for the modern world. Collectivized farms, once promised as utopias, yielded famines in fertile plains. Innovation? Crushed under bureaucratic boots, no room for the spark of free thought, no rewards for the bold inventor. By the Reagan era, the mighty USSR was begging for Western grain to feed its people, a nation blessed with vast black soil reduced to importer of basics. Why? Central control breeds complacency. It smothers the chaos of creativity that drives progress. No incentives, no drive, just a behemoth grinding to a weary halt. The leaders knew it, but denial was their armor. How much longer until the illusion shattered? Escalation, rapid cuts, oil derricks idling, gold bars melting away, crowds exchanging rubles furtively. Music intensifies with urgent strings. Then came the tipping point, the currency's quiet unraveling. The ruble, that supposed symbol of proletarian power, was a ghost in the global machine. Isolated, non-convertible, distrusted even by its own people who hoarded dollars like sacred relics. Foreign tech, food, machinery, paid for not with paper promises but with gold hoards and black gold from the earth. But in 1985, the oil markets crashed, prices plummeting like a stone, reserves evaporated. The Kremlin clawed for hard assets, but the well was dry. Whispers of black markets grew to roars, citizens bartering under the table, elites smuggling fortunes abroad. The ruble wasn't just weak, it was a facade crumbling under scrutiny. A superpower's lifeblood turning to dust, the end game approached, inexorable. Climax build. Berlin Wall footage in slow motion, dominoes falling across Eastern Europe, explosive sound design as barriers tumble. By 1989, the fourth act unfolded in spectacular betrayal, the Empire's satellite slipping the leash. The Berlin Wall, that concrete scar of division, didn't fall to tanks or treaties. It tumbled from sheer exhaustion. Poland's shipyard sparked the fire. Hungary tore down the fences. Czechoslovakia's velvet whispers turned to revolution. Romania's dictator met his end in a hail of fury. East Germany's Stasi archives exposed as hollow threats. One by one, the buffer states, strategic shields against the West, declared independence. Moscow watched, powerless, coffers empty. No invasions, no reprisals, just the echo of footsteps fleeing the sinking ship. The strategic depth that buffered the motherland vanished overnight. Vulnerability exposed, the core trembled. Peak tension, archival collapse, Gorbachev's resignation, Soviet flag lowered. Cut to nuclear silos standing silent, a ghost army. And on December 26th, 1991, the curtain dropped. In a mere 900 days from the wall's fall, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics dissolved into history's scrap heap. No external conqueror, no cataclysmic war, just an economic black hole swallowing it whole. Soldiers unpaid, mutinied in the ranks, bureaucrats scattered like leaves. The ruble hyperinflated into irrelevance, wiping out savings overnight. A force with 30,000 nukes, enough to scorch the planet, imploded from fiscal frailty. Overextension is stagnation, currency rot, imperial fracture, then total eclipse. The pattern, etched in the ruins of Spain's silver fleets, Britain's sterling sunsets, now replayed in red. Transition. Ominous shift to present day. Modern drone shots of U.S. aircraft carriers. Wall Street screens flickering, overlaid with red warning overlays tracing the same stages. Music swells to a foreboding hum. But here's the chill that should pierce the night. This isn't ancient history. It's a mirror held to America's throat. We're not immune. We're accelerating down the identical path. Stage by stage, the echoes grow louder. Let's dissect it before it's too late. Section break, graphic overlay, stage 1, the global reach trap. Footage of U.S. bases worldwide, troops deploying from Syria to South Korea. Start with the sprawl that's strangling us. Military commitments encircling the globe. Over 750 installations in 80 nations. Boots on the ground in 150 countries. NATO's shield over Europe. Ironclad pacts with Japan and South Korea. Patrols in the South China Sea. Endless patrols in the Middle East. We're the world's cop, firefighter, and banker. $850 billion a year funneled to the machine, dwarfing the next 10 powers combined. Yet it's a facade of might. Gear rusts in desert sands, enlistments plummet amid burnout, supply chains snag at every turn. What if Beijing eyes Taiwan? Moscow tests the Baltic borders. Tehran chokes the Gulf Straits. We can't surge everywhere. The web's too vast, the threads fraying. Just like the Soviets mirroring us, we're chasing shadows across the map. Overextended, overcommitted, over our depth. Smooth pivot. Stage 2. The Fiat Mirage. Cut to 1971 Nixon footage. Gold standard shattering. Then hyperspeed money printing visuals post-2008 and 2020. Deeper still, the dollar's debasement erodes the empire's core. Flashback to 71, Nixon slams the gold window shut, birthing pure fiat faith. Since then, a 98% erosion in buying power. From Y2K to now, the money supply ballooned 400%. Post-pandemic, trillions conjured from thin air, over 6 in the blink of an eye. No more alloy tricks like ancient debasements. This is digital sorcery, inflating away value under the guise of stability. Inflation whispers turn to shouts. Groceries, homes, fuel, all slipping from grasp. The world's reserve? It's a trust eroding, allies quietly diversifying into yuan and euros. The mechanism evolves, but the poison remains. Currencies untethered invite collapse, escalation, underscore, quote, underscore 8, underscore, debt clocks, ticking furiously, interest payment graphs spiking like heart monitors in crisis. Now the spiral tightens. Debt devouring the future. 36 trillion owed, 120% of GDP, a mountain casting shadows over prosperity. Interest alone nears $1 trillion annually, eclipsing our defense outlays. Deficits, routine rituals, 1.8 trillion last year in boom times no less. We're borrowing to service yesterday's loans, a Ponzi pyramid teetering. Spain's crown jewels pawned in repeated defaults. Britain's ledgers bled dry pre-Bretton Woods. Moscow's vaults emptied in the 80s. History's ghosts nod in recognition. When peacetime borrowing funds the interest beast, the end nears. Can we print our way out, or does the bond market finally call the bluff? Build urgency. Stage 4, the hollowed heartland. Empty U.S. factories, container ships unloading in Long Beach, supply chain maps vulnerable to disruption. Worse, our productive engine sputters to silence. Once the arsenal of democracy, America now imports its strength. We ideate in Silicon Valley, arbitrage on Wall Street, binge on Amazon, but manufacture. Outsource to Shenzhen's Hum, Mexico's Maquiladoras, Vietnam's assembly lines. A gaping trade deficit, $800 billion yearly hemorrhaging abroad. Dependencies chain us. Pharma from India, chips from Taiwan, steel from who knows where, even drone parts from adversaries. Echoes of Spain's silver galleons emptying the new world while artisans atrophied at home. When flows reverse, sanctions, blockades, pandemics, the fragility bites. No buffers, just vulnerability. The maker nation, a consumer shell, ripe for shock. Climactic reveal. Stage 5, fractures within. Urban decay shots, tent cities, protest crowds, polling data on trust plummeting, music crests with dissonant chords. And lurking beneath, the social fissures widen. Faith in the pillars, government, media, justice, hits rock bottom, polls screaming distrust. Crime surges in shadowed streets, homelessness swells like a tide no levee holds. Polarization poisons the well, communities fracturing along invisible lines. It's not just numbers. It's the human toll of empire's strain. Inequality yawning, dreams deferred, unity unraveling. Like the Soviet bread lines breeding resentment or Britain's post-war malaise, internal decay accelerates the fall. A house divided can't stand against the gales ahead. Conclusion. Wide shot of the American flag waving in wind, intercut with global powers rising. China's skylines, brick summits. Music resolves to a haunting, reflective melody. So as the sun sets on this chapter of dominance, the question hangs heavy. Will we heed the script, or script our own sequel to oblivion? From Rome's aqueducts to Moscow's mausoleums, the lesson scars the ages, empires overextend, debase, in-debt, hollow out, and fracture until they fade. America stands at the precipice, not invincible, but at a crossroads. The patterns aren't destiny, they're warnings. Diversify your bets, question the narratives, build resilience where fragility reigns. Because in the grand ledger of history, no superpower endures forever. But awareness. That's the spark that might just rewrite the ending. What side of history will you be on? Fade out. Screen lingers on a world map, US light, pulsing uncertainly. Call to action text. Subscribe for more revelations. End credits roll over subtle economic charts. Imagine a nation where the brightest minds vanish into the shadows, where life itself seems to unravel at the edges. Over 100,000 souls lost each year to the opioid crisis, not in some distant war zone, but right here on home soil. The innovators, the dreamers, they're fleeing abroad or tuning out entirely, chasing stability in foreign lands. Birth rates plummet to unprecedented lows, signaling a future without tomorrow. And in the halls of power, chaos reigns, endless gridlock, where compromise is a forgotten art, repairs are postponed indefinitely, and grand visions crumble before they're built. These aren't isolated headlines. They're the flashing red lights of a society fraying at the seams. Yet in boardrooms and living rooms alike, the illusion persists. Everything's under control. But peel back the veneer, and the truth stares back, unflinching, unforgiving. We're not just witnessing decline, we're accelerating through it. This is stage 5 of the empire's endgame, a phase where the social fabric tears irreparably and the once mighty core begins to hollow out. Picture the Roman forums, once buzzing with debate, reduced to echoes of discord, or the grand bazaars of ancient Persia, now shadowed by unrest. History whispers the same story across millennia. When internal rot sets in, no amount of external might can hold it together. In America today, trust in government, media, and even neighbors has eroded to dust. Crime surges through urban veins like a toxic flood. Homelessness sprawls across cityscapes like unchecked wildfires, and the opioid epidemic claims more lives than any battlefield ever did. It's a symphony of despair conducted by neglect and division. But why here? Why now? To uncover that, we must trace the invisible threads pulling it all apart, the economic undercurrents that turn prosperity into peril. Delve deeper, and you'll find the hidden machinery at work, a financial system built on illusions of endless growth, now buckling under its own weight. Empires don't fall from barbarian hordes alone. They crumble from within, poisoned by the very currencies they wielded as weapons. Consider Spain in the 16th century, flush with gold from the New World. That influx seemed like a boon, a glittering promise of eternal dominance. Yet it ignited inflation's slow burn, debasing the silver real until trade partners sought alternatives. Workshops emptied as cheap imports flooded in. Skilled artisans turned to idleness. Social bonds frayed as inequality widened, breeding resentment that festered into revolt. Britain followed suit 2 centuries later, its pound sterling the unchallenged king of global finance. The Industrial Revolution's factories hummed, but imperial overreach drained the coffers. Debt ballooned from endless wars and colonial upkeep, while the working class starved amid opulent palaces. By the early 20th century, the social decay was palpable. Strikes, slums, a nation divided against itself, and the Soviet Union. In the 1980s, its ruble was a facade, propped up by oil exports and central planning's iron grip. When prices soared and shortages bit, faith evaporated. Corruption riddled the elite. Morale collapsed among the masses, and the Union splintered in a haze of disillusionment. These weren't random misfortunes. They were the predictable outcomes of a cycle as old as civilization itself. Economists and historians, from Gibbon to modern thinkers like Ray Dalio, have mapped it. The rise fueled by innovation and trade, the peak marked by reserve currency supremacy, then the inexorable slide. Overextension abroad, fiscal profligacy at home. It's a mathematical inevitability. Print too much money and you erode its value. Borrow beyond capacity and the interest alone becomes a noose. Lose productive muscle to offshoring and speculation and your empire starves. America mirrors this blueprint with eerie precision. Since the 1970s, the dollar's role as the world's reserve has enabled trillions in deficits. Wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, stimulus packages that ballooned the national debt to over $35 trillion. Manufacturing, once the backbone, has atrophied. We're a service economy addicted to consumption, not creation. The financial implications, catastrophic. As social decay deepens, productivity stalls. Tax revenues shrink while welfare demands explode. Investors, sensing the rot, pull back. Foreign holdings of U.S. Treasuries dip, signaling doubt in the dollar's throne. Now escalate the stakes. What happens when these cracks widen into chasms? Stage 6 looms on the horizon, the erosion of reserve currency status, a silent coup that reshapes global power overnight. It's not a dramatic heist. It's a gradual diversification, like water seeping through stone until it bursts. Allies and adversaries alike begin hedging bets. Watch the BRICS alliance, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, pushing for a multipolar world. Their new development bank rivals the IMF. Their trade pacts bypass the dollar. Central banks worldwide, from Beijing to Bern, are hoarding gold at rates unseen since the Cold War. A quiet vote of no confidence. Russia and China settle energy deals in yuan and rubles, sidelining the greenback. Even Saudi Arabia, the oil kingdom once wedded to petrodollars, now accepts Chinese currency for its crude. These aren't blips. They're seismic shifts. When the dollar floods back, repatriated by nations no longer needing reserves, the U.S. faces hyperinflation's specter. Import costs skyrocket. Everyday goods become luxuries. The Federal Reserve's printing press, once a savior, turns tormentor. Why does this matter now, in the shadow of 2025? Because the acceleration is breathtaking. The COVID-19 pandemic wasn't just a health crisis, it was a financial accelerant. Trillions injected into the economy supercharged debt, while supply chains fractured and inflation clawed its way from dormancy. Geopolitical tensions, Ukraine, Taiwan, the Middle East, stretch military budgets to breaking points, echoing Britain's imperial strains. At home, polarization isn't mere politics. It's paralysis, blocking reforms needed to rebuild factories, secure borders, or balance books. We've sprinted through stages 1 to 5 in decades, not centuries. The pattern, etched in ledgers from Madrid to Moscow, warns of stage 7. Collapse, not a gentle fade, but a brutal implosion. The Soviet Union dissolved in under 3 years, from nuclear giant to fractured states. Britain's empire unraveled in 2 decades post-World War II, the pound dethroned by the dollar itself. Spain lingered, its decline a century-long bleed. But the end was no less final. Conquered, divided, forgotten. This isn't prophecy, it's pattern recognition. Three titans, Spain, Britain, the USSR, each cloaked in exceptionalism, dismissed the warnings. Spain boasted. Britain proclaimed. The Soviets insisted. Yet the math was merciless. Unsustainable debt, currency debasement, lost production, all funneled into social upheaval, then currency flight, then catastrophe. America chants the same mantra today. Technology as savior, the dollar as destiny, innovation as immortality. But algorithms can't rewrite arithmetic. You can't outrun entropy forever. The sequence is inexorable. Once stages 1 through 5 lock in, 6 and 7 follow like night after day. So where does this leave us? On the precipice, staring into an abyss that history has carved before. Perhaps there's a twist, an American ingenuity that defies the script, a policy pivot that restores balance, a resurgence of manufacturing and unity. Optimists point to post-World War II booms, to tech revolutions that could refill the coffers. But the pattern, cold and clinical, begs to differ. History isn't a suggestion, it's a ledger of hard-learned failures. Empires don't negotiate with their flaws, they succumb. If we're sprinting toward the edge, the question isn't if, but when. 5 years, 10, or sooner. A spark, a debt ceiling breach, a BRICS breakthrough, a market panic could ignite the chain reaction. Currency crisis cascading into debt default, political paralysis exploding into unrest. Overnight, the beacon of freedom dims to a regional relic, its global sway a faded echo. Reflect on this. 3 times, the mighty fell, their lessons etched in ruins from the Alhambra to the Berlin Wall. The United States, steward of the free world, now traces their footsteps, hollowed by excess, divided by doubt. The answers aren't in crystal balls or campaign promises. They're buried in the archives of fallen powers waiting for those willing to see. If this glimpse into the cycle stirs you, if it sharpens your view of the gathering storm, then join us. Because when the sequence unfolds, when the dollar wavers and the empire strains, you'll need more than headlines. You'll need the map history provides, the insights that reveal not just what happened, but why it always does. The past isn't prologue, it's the blueprint. And in these times, ignoring it isn't wisdom, it's peril.